Okay. Hello, welcome. This is Standard 6, the debriefing. We're talking about assessment. Um, for the first thing we talked about was what class would work best, and we decided to use math, because math has so many opportunities for either formative or summative assessments that are, cut and dry. Like math is, you either have the answer right or wrong. It's pretty easy to get quantified assessments with math. So our first element of the standard we talked about was formative and summative assessments, and I got a little help from, actually quite a bit of help from Paul, because he brought up some of the theory that he learned in Canadian Teachers College, and he talked about uh, for, as, and of types of assessments.
Sure. Yeah.
And the for one was, see, I've never heard this, and I wasn't familiar with it, but it made sense. He had for learning. We did bell work, which is where we had students. As soon as the bell rang, I had a question up on Prezi, and just had them, get at it right away, and walked around to see if they understood what we were doing. And I also had them, after they did that question, do another formative type of assessment where they put their heads down and they raised their hands
Right.
to see if there was four being they understood and one, and everyone kind of really knew the problem. So I knew right off the bat with that assessment that we could progress and get into the material. Everyone was on the same page. And then he talked about, so there's for learning, and that's the bell work. So you want to get people ready for learning. And then we did the of learning, which was the actual work that we did. And we had them doing work within the text. And we'll get into that some more, because there's some other parts of the standard that we can talk about there. And then there was the as learning, so we dealt with an exit card. And we'll get into more detail because this is going to come up again, but this is the type of assessments. Like I said, it's something new that I've wasn't too familiar with, or actually familiar with at all. For, as, and of. So the second part of the standard was the alignment of assessment with objectives. And I think we covered that by talking about how we started off with a bell assessment, like an assessment there, and then we ended with an exit, and then we had constant feedback during the class, where I said multiple times while they were doing their work session, raise your hand, and I'll come by and help anyone who has problems. So the alignment of our assessments, like I said, bell, feedback, and then exit at the end. And then the next part of the section was feedback, and like I said, we just covered that by talking about how we had students that, if they had trouble, they would raise their hand. And I even said in my lesson plan I was going to get to the point where if there were a lot of students that didn't have trouble, I would let the higher level students help out in that sense as well. But with math, these kids are right on point. It really doesn't take long to teach them. It's more about doing the work and getting them to do the work properly. And the next one was effective use of assessments, and this is where we got into some differentiation. And you can see in my video that I had an opportunity where students that finished the work quickly, I left time for a 2-point, like 2 dojo point multiple choice question. It's obviously one of the most difficult questions that were in the text, and I think there was 2 students that finished it and got those dojo points. So that worked out pretty well. So yeah, and then the last one, the accommodations. There really isn't anyone with a disability So this one was something that we just kind of had to ignore because my classroom doesn't have that element.
Yeah, we just kind of talked about it in our kind of
Yeah, if
prep.
yeah, if they're like saying,
Right.
you know, if we had students that were at a much lower level, or if they had, you know, when they were in a wheelchair,
Mm.
or you know, had trouble with sight or hearing, like accommodations could be met easily. But with the class that I had, there really weren't any disabilities. So, and overall, I think the class went pretty well, and I got to learn a couple interesting ideas for assessments, and I think it worked pretty well.
Yeah, I think it was a class. And
It went well. All right. Cheers.